I'm just going to basically do a bit of an introduction, and it's more really about, you know, the play in general, that it is an area play, why it's an area play, a very, very general idea of where we think things are headed. Um, then we're gonna pass this over to the companies after us, all of which are involved in the Yukon, of course, that are going to give you a lot more detail on their specific areas. Title of this is Area Play Crescendo, and by crescendo I don't mean that it's necessarily the peak, but it's going to keep building. Things have built a lot over the cold months in the last little while. I think the Yukon's going to be hugely more active than it was last year, and it was hugely active last year. It's going to be a madhouse up there this year. It's a classic area play. This is something Dave and I have been talking about for about a year and a half now. Area play is not something we throw around lightly. It basically means it's a speculative, discovery-driven area. Discovery is the key word here. In order to get a classic area play that generates the sort of overall market cap and interest by the market and number of participants, you need to have discoveries that are both new, that the market grabs onto and adds a lot of market cap to, and discoveries that are of a type that allows potential for other people in the area to make similar discoveries. Whether they do or not, we're not going to know for a while, but they can at least convincingly argue that they might. That's what gets you an area play. One thing I want to note at the start here, and it's important to keep in mind, is area plays do bear more than a little bit of resemblance to speculative bubbles, and in fact some people would argue that an area play is in fact a speculative bubble. That means you need to treat it that way. The reality is the more successful this play is, the more attention that it grabs, the more market interest it develops in it, the more likely it is that any given company in the play is going to get ahead of itself in terms of price. So you got to be smart about this stuff. You got to trade it. You got to be willing to take money off the table along the way, because anybody that gets really any kind of sniff of success is almost sure to get ahead of themselves price-wise, just because there's so much momentum built into it. Critical mass of companies that can make that argument. We're up to pretty close to 100 companies now. It's going to be more than that by the time the snow melts. I don't know how much exactly. There's a lot of companies that have been staking large areas, a lot of private consulting groups staking large areas. They'll be passing those projects on. So I expect to see another 20 or 30 companies involved at some level in this play. And one thing to note too is that there's going to be a lot of companies that attach themselves to an area play. This is common. They use it as a financing vehicle. They may not be that serious about the play themselves. They use it to get a little bit of cachet. It's usually not that hard to tell. Those kind of companies, they're guys that chase whatever is hot every month. I mean, ideally, if you're interested in the play, you want to be dealing with the guys that are there relatively early, that are serious, that are putting real budgets on the table, putting real money into the ground, because those are the guys that make discoveries. Sometimes the guys that are half serious get lucky, but normally it's the guys that are serious that make the discoveries. All of these things together are going to generate very high news flow. There's going to be tons and tons and tons of news coming out of this area. That's going to keep the excitement up through this summer. It's going to keep things rattling through the year. I mean, the market's a little bit soggier than it was, say, in the fall. But unless the market really pulls back, the Yukon's going to be a huge, huge story through the whole year and probably through the next couple of years. This is a very idealized diagram that we first put together when we talked about area plays about 15 years ago. There's 3 lines here. The dark line is a discovery company market cap, and in this case it's companies, not company. That first run-up that you see was basically Underworld. They got taken out, so their market cap's frozen. Then you got discoveries by Kamenak and Attack. And you've got all the companies that have gone into the area making minor discoveries or just getting market cap because they're there. Then you've got the play as a whole, which is a light blue line. And as you can see, as the play develops and the discovery companies, assuming successful discovery, add a lot of market cap, the area between the 2 top lines gets bigger and bigger. The area play X, the discovery companies, gets more and more value. You do reach a period where everybody gets out in the field. Some guys get lucky. Most guys won't. That's the nature of exploration. And those lines start coming together again because companies start falling out of the play. And that's sort of what the red line at the bottom is, basically just the number of companies in the play. It grows. We're in that period now, sort of period 6, 7, where it's growing very rapidly. It's probably going to top out late this year. Some of the guys that really aren't serious and just use it to do a financing, they'll be gone fairly quickly. Guys that don't have any luck this year, some of them will be gone. It'll also taper off. But this is a big area with 3 different discovery types. a lot of area that's never been explored for the discovery type that recently got made. So it has the potential to have a lot of legs. This isn't a play we think is going to disappear that quickly. Newness is a defining factor. It's new discoveries that make these things happening. That new deposit is what gets everything going. In this case, we've got 3 separate areas where discoveries have been made. All 3 of them are actually different type of deposit. It's opened up huge swaths of geology, huge areas for people to convincingly argue, I might be able to find something like they did. And that's really what gives us legs. In this case, there's 3 discovery areas, as we call them. I mean, 3A is the least far along, but essentially you've got white gold in the Dawson Range area. You've got Rao that is up above in the Selwyn Basin. You've got 3A, which is over on the southeastern side of the Yukon. You know, this is a small-scale map. That's a huge, huge area that these guys have got to work with. So there's plenty of room for new entrants. And one of the things that's helped a lot in the Yukon is that, one, you've got these 3 different deposit types that are in different geologies, but you've also got a system, very transparent, straightforward, equitable. When it comes to acquiring ground, you basically have to go up and put posts in the ground. It's not something where some guy can sit at a computer in Toronto or New York or London and stake half the territory. Somebody has to physically go out and do this staking. And that allows a lot more entrance. It's a much fairer system. It's more work, it's more expensive, but it's part of the reason so many companies and so many prospectors and private groups were able to get into this area. They didn't get crowded out by a couple of big players that just staked everything on a map. Staking's been going on for about 24 months now. I mean, this play didn't really get a lot of heat until the Underworld takeover, but there were, especially people with a lot of Yukon experience, that could see it was something special that started staking a couple of years ago. And believe me, the staking's going on now still. This chart that I'm throwing up next, this is the monthly staking totals. This is claims that have actually been registered, approved by the mining recorder for each month in 2008, 2009, and 2010. There's 2 things that are really worth noting about this. One, of course, is 2010 is hugely bigger than 2008 and 2009 are. What I found the most interesting when I first looked at this chart was that the earlier 2 years, it's almost like a bell curve. Most of the claims get staked in the summer, not surprisingly. I mean, it is the Yukon after all. It's not that pleasant up there this time of year. It's very cold. This year, far and away, the most staking came at the end of the year, and there are a large number of very large staking crews out there right now in February in the Yukon, pounding through snowdrifts, staking stuff. That's the real mark of a play that the sector's gotten very, very serious about. Cold winter, normally in the Yukon, one of the big questions, and we had it ourselves, we've been following this play for a year and a half, was the Yukon has a lot of seasonality. I mean, it's the Yukon after all. It gets very cold. In a lot of areas, you have a lot of trouble with water. One thing you need when you're core drilling is water. And in a lot of areas, it's quite difficult to get water flow, and impossible, really, in some places. It's not as easy as it is in, say, some places like Ontario and Quebec and the Shield, where there's actually areas where it's easier to drill in the winter because you're on muskeg. In the Yukon, a lot of areas are tough in the winter. I mean, it's doable with enough money, but it's very difficult. And there was a big question mark, is this play going to have this big, huge dip in the wintertime? I've thrown up 3 charts here. The first one is Underworld, which, of course, isn't around anymore. They were taken out by Kinross for their golden saddle discovery last April. The 2 other charts are the 2 other major discovery companies, Kaminak and Attack. And really why I put these charts up, what I found interesting was Underworld, of course, that chart ends in March. That's when the takeover offer was made by Kinross. But even Kaminak, if you look at what they've done, and Attack, what they've done from, say, October to now in February, it's very interesting to me how little pullback there's really been. Who knows? I mean, the market's the market. If there's a crash tomorrow, this all changes. But there's been very little seasonality, really, in the companies that have acknowledged discoveries already, even though they're in a period where there's really no news. I mean, I think Attack and Kaminak might have had 2 news releases in the last 2 months. I mean, there's nothing to say. It's wintertime. But that, again, shows you how much power there is and how much momentum there is in this play right now. People don't want to step back from it, even in the wintertime. Exploration's a negative cash flow business. It costs money to explore. The easier it is to raise money, the more exploration you can do. There's no one-to-one relationship. Money doesn't guarantee discoveries, but it sure as hell makes them easier, especially in a place like that where costs are high. And one of the great things that an area play does for an area is it allows a lot of people to throw a lot of money at an area that hasn't necessarily seen work. Yukon's always been a mining area. It's a very good area, very good jurisdiction in terms of dealing with regulators, in terms of getting things permitted. But a lot of these discoveries are new to the area they're in. People haven't, like in the Rakla Belt where Attack is, there hasn't been much gold exploration there in the past. It just wasn't viewed as an area that had that potential. Now there's a whole different set of eyes on it and very large amounts of money. And one interesting note I've got here on the end is the stated budgets that have been laid out so far by the three, quote unquote, discovery companies, the ones with new stuff that people really started following this year. Basically the Coffee Project, the Rakla Belt, and 3Ace. Those three companies' budgets that they've laid out so far are greater than the entire exploration budget for the Yukon any year from 1990 to 2005. That's three companies, or three groups, really. I mean, Attack is really a group of companies. There's a whole bunch of other guys, and you're going to hear a couple of them after this, that also have very, very big budgets. This year is going to be far and away the largest year in terms of expenditures in the Yukon. And when you throw that much money at an area that's geologically prospective, I think the odds are you're going to see more discoveries this year. I can't point you to company X. I think it's definitely going to be that one, but I think there's going to be more of them, and it's an area you got to pay attention to when you got this kind of activity.